Blake Powers, Bond Life Chicago. Welcome back to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure.
Hey, you wore your suit. You are there. That's always a great way of making sure you get on the show again.
For sure. I don't have a lot of reasons as a police officer to wear a suit at 9 a.m. on any given Monday or Sunday. Or it's not even Sunday, it's Saturday at this point. But I gotta wear the suit when I can for sure.
Hey, that's right. Any excuse. Also, like I definitely want to get your perspective on this as a law enforcement officer. The
hmm
movie we just watched. Am I the only one that noticed a complete absence of the police?
There was no law enforcement whatsoever. No law. It like we talked about a little bit before recording. It's a Western for all intents and purposes. There's always at least a sheriff or a marshal or something in even Westerns. And this it was zero, except for the little bit when they were in.
They like
I
break
can't
someone out of
remember
a
what it
jail.
wasn't New York. They called it some other big city where they had to go to when he had to steal the bill of sale.
Yeah.
And
You
like,
hear police sirens.
yep, that was the closest that it came to anything like that. Otherwise, it was nothing.
All right. Well, before we start talking about Zorro Rides Again, just as a reminder to people on the show, we are covering the influence of Indiana Jones, the road to Indy 5. And today we're going to be talking about Zorro Rides Again 1937. Oh my goodness, so many things to talk about with that. But first and foremost, Blake, what are your feelings on Indiana Jones 5? Like, have you seen the trailers? Where are you at with it? And how do you feel about the potential of the movie going forward?
So the first trailer that I saw was actually during the Super Bowl this year. I
Mhm.
knew that they were coming out with one. Awesome mug, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was exciting to finally see the trailer itself, and it's like, oh, sweet, this is actually getting to be. It's going to come out this year, so that was super exciting. I'm a big Indiana Jones fan. So that was awesome. It looks like they're going in a completely different direction than they went with Crystal Skull, which
Mhm.
I'm not entirely upset with, but at the same time, it's like, where other series kind of are all standalone movies, Indiana Jones is kind of at least somewhat gone along, with it being the same storyline throughout. So it's going to be interesting to see what they happen with that. Um, it looks like the same stunts as they've kind of gone throughout, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, later on in this interview. Um, so that's exciting because Indiana Jones has some of the best stunts, I think,
Mhm.
in the movie industry. It's going to be interesting to see how realistic they make them look with Harrison Ford as the actor. But I'm excited overall.
It's one of those things that I'm going to be curious to see how they play it because there's definitely Harrison Ford. I was commenting to someone recently, like he really aged very well for most of his
He did.
career. I
He
mean,
did.
I saw there's the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles or the Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, depending on which version they marketed. I don't know if you've watched it all,
hmm
but there's one episode that Harrison Ford was on The Fugitive and was filming
Okay.
nearby. And they're like, "Hey, do you mind just coming in like for an opening cameo?" And it's
Yeah.
called like the Blues something, and it's amazing because you get to see India Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones's 50s, and the
hmm
guy's still like you're like, oh wow, yeah, that's how I want to be when I'm in my 50s.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, he was, and even in the Star Wars movies, the most recent ones, he doesn't look
hmm
bad for his age. It's
hmm
just a wonder of like how well he can move.
So that Simon Watterson book, he's the guy that was the trainer for Daniel Craig in the Bond films.
Okay. Yep.
Apparently, he also like in the book he trained Harrison Ford for Indy 5.
hmm
And his
Hmm.
point in that is because he shows the routine he gave him. He's like,
Yeah,
again, you have to adjust a little bit based on age. I mean, the
for
reality is
sure.
Harrison Ford is in his late 60s,
I
right?
think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
he can't train like Daniel Craig does.
No, definitely
But
not.
still he's actually putting in the work so he isn't going to fall apart
Right.
on stage. But it's also gonna be interesting because they have so much of that the deepfake technology now. And it
Yep.
looks like in Indy 5, they're gonna be using that to de-age him a little bit in a couple of
Yeah.
like flashback scenes.
Right.
I'm hoping that they use that to like some of the more energetic action sequences. Like I'm sure you see it the moment on a train
Yep.
where I'm excited about that. Call me a sucker. There is something special about two guys fighting on a train rooftop.
Yep. And again, that's something that, Indiana Jones does better than anybody else, I think, truthfully, in action sequences is any type of really, mode of transportation. You can bet that Indiana Jones is probably going to be fighting on top of it.
I'm excited. There's always a chance it's gonna suck, but you know what? I will be there opening day with my fedora and leather jacket on. The question is, will
And
they let me inside with the whip?
I was about to say the same thing. You're going to at least try to smuggle it in.
Good try to smuggle it in. So, Blake, we watched Zorro Rides Again, which it's one of those films that I did not realize until we both agreed to this. I'm like, oh, this sucker's 3.5 hours long.
I did well, and I thought it was a movie until I was like, oh, it's 3 hours, and then as watching 20 minutes in, and it's like, oh, chapter two. Okay, this is a TV series, which it's not bad, but it was like, all right, cool, we're doing this thing.
So, for background for people that aren't familiar with this, Zorro Rides Again is a serial. So, back in the 30s, they would, you'd, for like your nickel, you could walk into the movie theater and watch a whole bunch of basically like your Saturday morning cartoons, but TV version. So, like, they had serials of The Shadow, of Batman. Like, oh, you want to really just see how we have made good improvements in Hollywood since the 30s. Watch the original Batman serial where it literally has a line and they're like, and I'm quoting this verbatim, a kind benevolent government is taking care of those shifty-eyed Japs is literally a line in the Batman serial because it took place it was like recorded in the 40s
Yep,
during World War
in the
II.
middle of World War II.
And
Yeah.
you're like, oh my goodness, they got away with saying that. That's horrible. It's hilarious to watch. Like Batman's a government agent.
Yep.
Guys, I cannot make this stuff up. But Zorro Rides Again is an example of those types of little serials. So it's little mini episodes, kind of like YouTube videos, kind of like streaming shorts. Really, The Mandalorian, I was thinking about later because season 3 started,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like the modern version of that serial,
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
just with much better writing. Much better writing.
Yep. Yes, definitely. But they've had a couple decades to kind of get their skills honed in on.
Exactly. Well, so Zorro Rides Again, basic premise, and this is the thing that I knew through me when I first started watching it, because I'd seen like the scene from where he jumps on the truck. I'm like, that can't be right. And then I was like, okay, basically, opening plot. Zorro Rides Again is James Vega, the great grandson of the original Zorro,
Yep.
takes on the Zorro mantle when the evil banker is trying to take over the railroad that his uncle owned part of, and then two other people owned a part of, like Philip and Phyllis Andrews.
And there's like a
Phyllis, like
Joyce in
that.
there too, or
Joyce.
something.
Joyce is her name. Yes, it's
Yeah, that's
Philip
what
and
it is.
Joyce. Some of the characters you forget their names as soon as you can. The and you're nodding because you understand.
Yep, I actually had to look that. I was like, what was that blonde girl's name? So before jumping on, I looked it up. That's the only reason I remembered it was I knew it was a J, but I couldn't remember what it was. I probably would have called her like Jocelyn. I don't know.
Jocelyn. All generic blonde number 5. This
Yep.
so it was very it's very of its time. But basic premise is that Zorro shows up again, picking up where his grandfather left off, great grandfather left off to save the
Yep.
railroad. His uncle dies tragically in an Uncle Ben type situations. There's a bandit named El Lobo who is being paid by the
Marsden.
Marsden, the banker, who that guy must have gotten the easiest paycheck in the world.
All he
Every
had to do was sit at
episode,
his desk.
he stayed at the desk. And okay, so I looked up on IMDb, like, what are the like trivia facts? And literally, the quote that people remember here is J.A. Marsden, Zorro, Zorro, Zorro. Can't you get rid of that man?
And like his voice sounded very familiar. Like he had to have been a big actor for me to like. I recognize his voice from something, unless maybe this was the one that got his big break.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna Noah Barry is the actor's name. I'm gonna look up what he did. Um,
Because unless somebody else just sounds just like him, it sounded like an iconic voice.
oh, so here's something interesting. I'm looking through here. I don't see anything that stands out to me in his filmography
Hmm.
other than this is an interesting little like nugget that should be in the trivia. He was in The Mark of Zorro, the Douglas Fairbanks 1920
Hmm.
film, and his role was as Sergeant Pedro Gonzalez. So that's an
Interesting.
interesting like
Yeah. So he came
nod.
back. He came back again. Yeah.
And you can definitely tell that they're like taking the Douglas Fairbanks version is their influence because this is one of my favorite tropes in it, where they're all standing around and there's this giant painting of Zorro. And I'm like,
In the middle of like their like family room.
and makes it even better, it doubles as the secret passageway to Zorro's hidden cave.
Yep.
Like, how did they not know this first and foremost? Be my question. It's sitting in the living room. Someone had to install the painting at some point after
Right.
he was already revealed to be Zorro.
And
And why
it's
do
not like
the
he
Andrews live there?
and it's not even like he had to like move like a book or something to open it. It was just like, oh, I'm just gonna push this fake door open. The cleaning lady would have found it at some point, but maybe
Eventually,
that's why
someone
the
sees the
gentleman that did,
handprints.
yeah, yeah. I don't know.
This so I'm just gonna run through the 12 chapters. So it's in 12 installments. The first episode is the longest because it's 29 minutes and 41 seconds.
Hmm.
And I'll admit, so first one is Death from the Sky. The second is The Fatal Minute. The Fatal Minute, that's where I started being like, oh, cool. Maybe they've got like really great titles for all of these.
Right.
And then you realize, oh, they're just using whatever the like cliffhanger is as their title. And
Yep. Exactly.
it's always supposed to be more exciting than it actually is. The second one, third, Juggernaut. Fourth, Unmasked, classic Zorro trope. Five, Sky Pirates. I had so much hope for Sky Pirates. And then it ended up being like someone stealing a plane and it crashes 2 seconds later. I'm like, you
Yep.
gotta be kidding me. The Fatal Shot, Burning Embers, Plunge of Peril, Tunnel of Terror. There's alliteration here, folks. Trapped, Right of Way, and Retribution. Now, one of the things that's the hallmark of these serials is that each one ends on a cliffhanger so that you
Yep.
wonder, oh, what happens next? And you want to get there to watch the
Find out
next
next
one,
week.
which is actually a really great narrative device. It's just, how did you feel about this? Most of the cliffhangers, I felt they just immediately like, it happened, but no one was hurt.
Yes. So, you know, that's one of the things I think that they've done a lot better nowadays rather than obviously back then. The cliffhanger is awesome because then it gets you hooked and waiting for next week. Obviously, in a modern day season of binging, it doesn't make as much of a difference. Um, but that part was okay. But then, where nowadays we get like the 15 to 30-second recap of last week on da da da, this happened. It catches you up, it reminds you what's going on, and then all of a sudden it goes into it and you get resolution. This one, it was almost like 5 minutes of watching the exact same
It was like the highlight
filming.
reel.
Yeah, it was like watching the exact same episode you just watched. And then, like you said, it was like, the one that sticks out in my head the most was the Tunnel of Terror, which I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be interesting. Like you said earlier, they're fighting on top of a train.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they go into a train tunnel. There's like some type of explosion that goes on, but they're not even stuck in the tunnel. It's like they went through the tunnel and now it's done. And it's like, was that the Tunnel of Terror? I guess. And now I guess we're on to this next sequence. But it was stuff like that where, yeah, I think it would have been better if it wasn't, almost a third of the episode
Mm-hmm.
chapter
Is the recap.
being the recap, yeah, and
The
then a immediate resolution.
The plunge of peril is the one that stuck that just I was like, you really that and the fatal minute. So in the fatal
Mm-hmm.
minute, the end of it is Zorro's trapped inside the warehouse. That's the explosion's happening. The explosion
Yep.
happens. Did he escape? No, he was there. He was fine.
Yeah. No big deal.
No big deal. The then in the plunge of peril, they like pull on the lever as he's shooting down this rail car thing.
Yeah.
They pull lever so it goes even faster, and he's going to make a crash land. And then they show you like recap, and then he just like rolled off
Yep.
before, and you're like, really? That's that's how you're gonna play it? So
Yep.
also this is contemporary for the time, which we didn't mention, which is why he is Sans sword, which seems weird
Right.
for a Zorro thing, but he uses the whip all the time. You can definitely see where they use that for Indiana Jones. They're like, oh, we're using the whip.
Yes, and that's yeah. At first, I was expecting a sword. Instead, we got 6-shooter revolvers, which kind of again leans it more towards like a western. But you get a ton of that whip, and even to the point where nowadays we're used to Zorro using the sword to get that Z.
Uh-huh.
In this, he uses the whip to do the same thing,
Which
which
requires
I
a great
thought
deal of
was
skill.
for sure. And I think that was kind of a cool dynamic. But then, like you said, you definitely see that as a huge influence for Indiana Jones. And you yourself, having dressed as Indiana Jones and having that whip, I have a question for you.
Okay.
How do you, if you know how, obviously both Indiana Jones and Zorro uses the whip to latch onto something and then swing from it. How does that ever become undone in order to continue to carry said whip?
So I here it's one of those things that actually bothers me because of course I have so I think it was what year did Crystal Skull come out? Like leading up to Crystal Skull,
Early 2000 teens, maybe,
I thought it was 2008. Let's do this as a quick double check.
maybe late 2000s. Yeah.
It's amazing how time moves us by. 2008, yeah. So
All
like
right.
2007, I started getting really into Indiana Jones, and I've basically had a whip ever since.
Okay.
And I've played with that thing a lot. It is really hard to get it to actually hold on to something to begin with. Like I
Okay.
have never really I've only been in like two situations where I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely enough hold.
Oh,
I
this
could
could hold
swing
my
from it.
body weight.
Complete and utter fantasy. And then trying to delatch it afterwards is a pain because it's lots of
Oh,
like
I bet.
shaking your
Yeah.
arm. Come on, come loose, come loose.
They never show that part in the movies.
No, because that part editing, movie magic. That's all
Yep.
it is. In this, so what were there any highlight moments for you? Like I think this definitely leans on action a lot. Like the fight scenes are actually really enjoyable.
Yes, I agree. Whereas the fight scenes for me, the fight scenes are actually so enjoyable that the dialogue was almost like I would almost like drown out the dialogue. Like you said, I really couldn't remember the names of most of the characters just because it was like when they started talking and there wasn't action, it was like, oh, I don't like
There's
I'm
no
trying.
story happening here. It's literally event set
Right.
up to this is so we could summarize each episode here. It is Marsden tells Lobo to do something
Yep. Over the radio
over the radio.
That Zorro somehow got the frequency of.
Zoro somehow got the frequency of it because then he's sitting there, he with his friend, who is Ronaldo, is
Yep.
his like little buddy instead of Bernardo, which is the
Right.
typical little buddy. But I also made a note, he like Ronaldo helps Zorro publicly, and no one
Yeah.
thinks this guy works for the Vegas. James
Yeah.
Vega is Zorro's
Nobody's like, hey, that
descendant.
guy looks familiar. That's Alfred. Maybe he knows who Batman is.
Things like that. And so many of the conversation, we're getting a little off topic, but so many of these conversations end up being, if only James Vega was more like his grandfather.
Yeah, you're not even half the man. You're just your nose is in a book constantly.
The fact is, everyone knows Zorro's story, and he's doing the exact same thing, and no one
Yep.
comments about it.
Yep. Yeah,
So
even the family members are just like, You couldn't be, yeah, you couldn't be Zorro. You just read all day.
Oh my goodness. And then he sings. Oh, the singing scenes also.
Yes, that was towards the end. That was like maybe like the seventh episode. He sings to her, and she was like, "That was pretty good, but that's still not as good as Zorro."
Which means she knows Zorro sings as he rides his horse, which you just sit there and go,
Yep.
why? But anyway, so Blake, what was like your highlight favorite action scene in the thing? Or give me your favorites. Like what did you think of the action in general?
The action general again, like we said, was awesome. Um, anytime Zorro was jumping from the horse onto
Uh-huh.
something, I thought was awesome. Again, we talked a little bit about it pre-recording, where it's like not only is that an awesome stunt, not only is that something that Indiana Jones uses a ton of, but back in the 30s, they're filming that, and that's actually somebody doing that rather than
Mm-hmm.
nowadays it's gonna, a lot of it would be green screen in most instances. So that was just even more impressive where they were able to catch that on film. Somebody was able to do that, or more or less willing to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and it just made for really good action scenes, like the one that you shared, was like him jumping off the horse onto another guy with a horse, knocking him down a hill, and then a fight ensues. Stuff like that was like, it was really cool, especially with it being back from the 30s.
So I have a fun fact on that. I'm not certain. Do you watch many Westerns?
um a decent amount, I'd say. I used to be pretty big into the westerns.
Did you ever see Stagecoach with John Wayne?
Yes, I'm sure I've seen it. I can't picture it exactly,
That's
but I
okay.
know John Wayne or Clint Eastwood movies. I've seen all of those ones.
So there's the famous scene where on in Stagecoach, John Wayne's like he like leaps on top of the horses, and it's
Yes,
been
yes,
used
yes.
and parodied, and even in Indiana Jones, they've used like elements from that scene shot for shot.
Hmm.
The stunt guy that did that was Ed Yakima. Yakima was his nickname. Canut,
Okay.
something like that, one of those types of names. But he was the stunt guy. He's the guy who basically anytime Zorro is masked, that
Yeah.
is 9 times out of 10, according to the website, that's Yakima. And
Interesting.
so he was like the Hollywood stunt guy. And this is like one of his first chances to do his own, to really come up with the stunts, do the
Right.
things. So
Hmm.
he did almost all the stunt work for John Wayne.
Okay.
And that's one of the big things that when they made Indiana Jones, they're like, this was the best stunt work of Hollywood. And we're going to
Right.
do our best to imitate that. And you can tell because
Awesome.
really every fight scene has it's not like this is great filmmaking by any stretch. In
Right.
case any of our other comments earlier did not let the listener know that, it's not great Hollywood, but the fight scenes are genuinely like energetic. They're not like that sped up kind either, at least most of the time.
Right.
That scene, my favorite one mentioned to you before, and you just brought up, he jumps off a horse, like throws another guy off of his horse, and then they're rolling down a hill. He rolls up, draws his gun mid roll, and points at the guy,
Yep.
and that is like just a beautiful cartwheel motion.
Yep.
And then there are other scenes where it's just we talk about in James Bond the fight scene between Red Grant and James Bond, Sean Connery,
Right.
and come on, what's his name? He's in Jaws.
Oh, yes. I can't name the actor. I mean, obviously I know Red Grant and I know the captain
Yeah,
from Jaws, but I can't picture that
I,
guy's
I
name.
I can't remember his name. It'll come to us later. But the point is that that's like one of those big visceral fight scenes that like goes throughout the James Bond canon as one of the
Right.
best. I would say almost every episode, at least of 12 episodes, at least 9
Yeah, they all
have
had
really
full
good punch 'em ups.
yep, full on like knockout drag out fights. And it wasn't like, when I say knockout drag out, I don't mean like it was prolonged and like you were just waiting for it to end. It was like a full-fledged good fight scene that would give, even nowadays, most fight scenes a run for their money, where, and obviously with me doing my
Yeah,
breakdowns,
that was one
like,
of the first things I was like, I really want to hear what Blake thinks about this because he's
Yep.
doing these fight breakdowns.
Like a lot of the ones that we see in the earlier Bond films, so 60s and 70s are like these huge Hollywood haymakers. There was none of that in this. It was like actual, looked like actual fighting, actual punches being thrown. And obviously they were not actually hitting each other or kicking each other in the face, but they're not making it huge and cinematic for the camera. It actually looked like a legit fight scene. And like you said, it was at least one in every episode. And that again, if nothing else, the action was worth it to sit through those 3 hours.
Exactly. I mean, again, that's where it's interesting to see how they are basically all repeats of each other because
Right.
so Marsden calls Lobo, Lobo does something, and then, oh no, James, why aren't you doing anything? James, oh shucks, I should do something. And he puts on the Zorro mask and does something, and he
Yep.
has a good fight. Like
Yep.
even though it's a repetitive process, and we joked about this feels like binging
Hmm.
old TV where you had to like I don't know. Have you seen Rockford Files?
I don't think so. I don't think
I,
I've seen that.
just older TV, you can always tell. Oh, each episode's basically a repeat of each other, but
Right.
it didn't matter because you're watching it every week. In this
Right.
case, they'd play these for like months at a time. You don't like the way that they were released wasn't necessarily a regular schedule,
Right.
which is why that large repeat chunk was always so important. But
Right.
at the same token, I liked that because you could get the just like those fight scenes. If you those were what
You
they
could
would
almost get them
replay at the
again.
beginning,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, the plot here doesn't matter. They've decided it doesn't matter, and we don't care either. We just want to see
Right.
Zorro beat some people up.
Yep, exactly. Just have Zorro kick some butt, and we'll keep on getting our nickel per seat. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is I think it's episode best. Like, there's actually one really good movie idea in this in the plot.
Okay.
I think it's the fourth one. So I wrote notes for each episode, and it's amazing how we watch. First one, I have a whole bunch of notes. Chapter two, some notes. Then we get to four, and it's like 2 lines, five,
Yep.
2 lines, six, 1 line, seven, 1 line. And it made me laugh so much. I think it's the third. Yes, it's the chapter three. When the
Okay.
warehouse blows up, they need to get the supplies from the warehouse. Otherwise, the railroad's bankrupt. They can't do the thing.
Right.
Marsden writes a note for Vega saying he actually be willing to buy all of Vega's stock.
Right.
Vega uses like disappearing ink type stuff to get rid of the ink, retypes letter saying Marsden is ordering supplies on his account to go
Yeah.
to the railroad. I was like, wow, this is actually like a good plot element.
Yeah. That part was very and again, from the 30s, it was like, why hasn't somebody like they're I mean, in an essence of remaking and taking old ideas constantly in the film industry now, it's like that's a really good, sneaky idea. Surprised nobody else has thought of something like that.
Zorro, in my opinion, is one of those properties that does very rarely gets its due. We have
Yeah.
had the original Zorro movies. There was the
Hmm.
Douglas Fairbanks one, and I think Douglas Fairbanks Jr. actually did the remake to that one.
Okay.
And those were like the big blockbusters of their time, swashbucklers. Then you got the Mark of Zorro with Tyrone Power, which is basically a remake.
Yep.
And then the Disney show, this lots of Republic serials. There are like four different
Yep.
things the studio did with Zorro. And Zorro keeps getting used in different ways because like none of the Republic ones are repeats of the original stories.
Right. They're all a little bit different. The only thing being similar is just Zorro himself. But even Zorro kind of varies, or the person who Zorro is a little bit different in each one. Yeah.
But we don't have like modern Zorro. The closest after the Antonio Banderas films, we had, which by the way, after seeing Puss in Boots 2, I want Antonio Banderas for Zorro 3.
He'd be so awesome. Like, well, and so personally, having watched those ones and then watching this series, Zorro Rides Again, like, I can't picture anybody being more Zorro than Antonio Banderas. Like, that is Zorro in essence, really. But yeah, it'd be awesome if he could do another one, or if he could even do similar to his first one, where he's basically mentored by the original Zorro, who's now a
Mhm.
much older man, and now he passes it on again to somebody else so that it can actually continue on. That'd be Either way, that'd be pretty awesome.
There's a kids show that was on Hulu for a while that was Zorro, but it's like Zorro as a kid.
Right.
And I've watched a couple episodes, but my younger siblings like it. And they take a lot of things. You're like, oh, that's actually like from the Disney show, which that was the Zorro I grew up with. So I always appreciate it. But I always feel like Zorro
Right.
was a property which could at any moment become a franchise.
I think so. I mean, it's just that, and again, they have to kind of figure out, they got to find somebody young enough that's willing to do it long enough. And then if they're going to do it, they've got to kind of keep it on the same basis to be able to keep it going. Cause otherwise it's, this one's a Western, this one's different, they're all kind of jumping all over the place. It's the same
Uh-huh.
character, but not really. Otherwise, there's nothing else linking them.
I haven't read them, but apparently Zorro's done really well in comic books for the
Hmm,
last
that's interesting.
five,
I
ten
could see
years.
that though. Again, action.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and it's pulp. Like the original
right.
books were written the same way the Shadow stories were, just
Hmm.
serialized. And that's why, admittedly, like this is for as much fun as we've kind of made of it. It has it. This is its roots. It is a serial, even in book
Right.
form. It's you get different installments of a continuing story,
Right.
which has nail biting action. And really, this show did do a good job of that.
Yeah.
Well, other than the payoff for the action, like they always have a good cliff that just he never quite falls off it enough.
Right. Yeah, it was never, he was in peril, but he wasn't really in too
Not
much peril.
not perilous enough. The other note I have from this is so by the 11th episode, 11th episode, Marsden does the thing that he should have done to begin with because I ask myself if you're trying to steal this company at this point, you don't care how you do it.
Right.
Lobo and his men just literally walk into the Vega home, which again, why are the Andrews living there?
I couldn't tell you, but yeah, they don't even have to like knock out any guards. They just like help themselves. They're just like, yeah, we're here.
They literally just walk in, separate them, then hold a burning fire iron and say, "This is for the other one unless you sign." I'm like,
Yep.
guys, should have tried this a little 10 chapters ago.
Yep. It would have been a lot less headache for sure.
And then Zorro has to that's when he goes to it's not New York, but
I
it's
can't
some
remember
big
the name of the
city.
city. I think it's some made up name. I want to say, but yeah, they basically just he jumps on a plane and goes over and steals the bill of sale out of the office, which was interesting, kind of. But
It was something different because admittedly, I think the thing that this show struggles with and is they never it feels like they aren't wholly committing to the idea of Zorro being in the modern day.
right,
Because there is so much of it where they're like, we're going for the Western feel, down to the fact
yep,
that Lobo and his men look like they're ripped out of any B Western that Republic would have made.
yep, any cowboy movie, in the 50s or 60s, it would have been like, yeah, okay, yeah, those are the rough and tough bad guys that John Wayne or Clint Eastwood are gonna have to stop. Yeah.
But it would have been interesting to see them lean more into this is the modern day. Zorro is
Hmm.
trying to do what he does in the modern day. Like I think the thing where he steals the paper, gets the paper and removes the ink, has the other guy pay for it. That was an interesting difference of
Right.
its more modern element. He's using a typewriter. This we
Right.
see him on that plane in like his Vega disguise, which is kind of very Batman. Like that felt the most Batman like
Yep.
moment.
Yeah, he was very, kind of just rich playboy ish. It's not like women falling all over him, but just rich, well-to-do man, oh, I'm going on a business trip, and nobody else would think anything of it. Even going back to the other, um, the Andrews, they're just like, oh yeah, we'll have to see what happens when James gets back. Like they didn't think anything of him just randomly just like leaving. Also, it's like, okay, he's just going to the big city, whatever.
But the plane looks gorgeous. Like again, it has that very nostalgic shot
Yep.
feeling. It doesn't. It's amazing how some things can look dated and others just look charming.
Right.
And the whole plane thing is actually quite charming.
Yeah. And again, they even, because I'm assuming that would be in the 30s would probably be towards the early onset of kind of like commercial flights.
Mm-hmm.
So, they even have that line in there where the Zorro character, like turns over and he's like, "Are you okay?" Because his assistant is like, nails stuck into the armrest, like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And then they flash forward to now they're in like the taxi and he's like, "How are you feeling?" He's like, "Much better." Yeah, and it's like, but of course Zorro's comfortable flying because he's not scared of anything.
Oh, I'm not scared of anything. And there's just again, this show has interesting elements that you can see where Hollywood is starting to move.
Hmm.
And that's one of the fascinating things about it. Did you have a favorite stunt in the action sequences?
Probably again, just him. Anytime he was jumping from one mode of transportation to another, it literally screamed, is because we are trying to compare it to Indiana Jones. It literally screamed Indiana Jones, and to the point where like I would even like if I could close my eyes, I could see Indiana Jones doing the same exact thing if he didn't actually do the same exact thing, and any of that stuff was really cool to see.
Watching this, so I've just recently watched The Venture Brothers. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
It sounds familiar, but I don't know if I've seen it recently.
Uh, Worth watching, but it's an Adult Swim thing where they basically kind of make fun of the old adventure cartoons,
Okay.
like Johnny Quest and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they do it really smart. By like the third season, it really develops its own thing. It's not just a copy of a copy of a copy. All the characters
Hmm.
are their own things. I was thinking I would love to see like that kind of treatment to this
Yeah,
format. Like it'd be
that would be
interesting to
neat.
see a and admittedly, so like I think The Mandalorian, like I said, is actually like a modern version of the serial in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. But I would love to see where because there's so many moments in the show, you're like, really, the action is right there. Like it's got
Hmm.
the right action, it's got the right format. It just needs a better the plot even works. It just needs better
Just a
writing.
Yep.
If
Yeah,
they like
just
took the
needs better
dialogue,
dialogue.
I would love to see like a meta version of this that's a little
Yeah.
self-aware that it would really be entertaining.
Yeah, I think like, we've not to beat it any worse, but yeah, I think it was mostly just everything worked except for just a little bit better writing and a little bit better dialogue because those were the when people were talking was when it was difficult not to drown it out really. You that was where it was more energy to stay focused. But otherwise it moved along quite well for the most part.
At the moment we have action fight scenes, you're gripped into
Then
it.
Yep, then it's like locked on for sure.
Question: who would you cast currently in Hollywood as the new Zorro if they made one?
That's tricky. So again, because it depends. Are we going this route? Because if it goes this route, it's although the last name's Vega, it seems like it's more of like a white businessman. If we go, the more recent route, then obviously it's going to be more of you know, a Hispanic actor that is good with a sword and be quick on his feet.
That's one of those things that I'm always curious about because I'm not Zorro technically is Spanish.
Right.
Like he is the Spanish version of English colonialism and that.
Yes. It's
So
and real quick, because that was the other thing that I got is it was almost like a Robin Hood storyline
yes.
because and although the James Vega's wealthy himself, he's basically fighting the rich banker
Mm-hmm.
and in essence, fighting the rich to give to the poor and to like keep the poor safer from this evil banker. And that I got a huge Robin Hood feel from that, because it was, and again, it was, oh, I hear they're going to do this. Okay, we're going to stop them while they're on their way to do this. Just like Robin Hood would just jump out of some trees, like on a trail with a, stop, you know, the sheriff of Nottingham, and it's like, okay, nope, we're taking whatever you got there in the wagon. It was
It's
very much the similar vibe.
it really actually does capture a good swashbuckler feel. Like we use the term
Mm-hmm.
swashbuckler to describe Indiana Jones, even though like most time you think, oh, there's a sword, a swashbuckler. Indy doesn't carry a sword,
Nope.
but it has that kind of swashbuckling energy, which this show, again, despite its flaws, really does capture.
And I'll be honest, um, I thought, maybe my naivety of it, I thought swashbucklers, because it's usually used more so for, in like essence of like pirates.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was more of a pirate term. So prior to doing this and prior to even just watching it, but I know once you asked me to jump on, I looked up the definition of swashbuckler, and immediately, like, it's like that is Indiana Jones to a T. And then now, watching this again, it was like you put a picture of Indiana Jones and a picture of Zorro and maybe a picture of Johnny Depp and Captain Jack Sparrow, and that is basically the definition of swashbuckler. And like you said, I think that they nailed that in essence. Like, again, you look that up in the dictionary and it should be a picture of those three characters, like, no
Mm-hmm.
doubt.
Perfect adventurer.
Yep.
In Indiana Jones, do you have a favorite fight scene? Like, what is your favorite stunt in that? Oh, which reminds me, have you seen The Mandalorian?
Yes, yes, and
Okay,
I'm caught up. We won't do, won't
no
do any
spoilers.
crazy spoilers, but I'm caught up to the most recent episode. Yeah.
Did you see that episode in, I think it's season one, where he's hanging off of the Jawa?
Yes.
And it's almost a shot for shot of
Yep.
Last Crusade with him hanging on to the
Yep. Yeah.
tank.
It was, like you said, that's almost the same exact thing where it's like, oh, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. Oh, yeah. Oh, I got to fight, but I'm hanging upside down. Yeah. That was, and they probably, unless you found it to confirm it, they probably took that shot for that same thing.
I looked up the YouTube clip and then
Mm-hmm.
played it and then played the other one. And literally, it's the exact same, like
Shot for
blocking
shot
camera.
almost.
And you're
Yeah.
like, that it just goes to show classic things are always classic.
Yep.
In Indiana Jones, do you have like a favorite fight or a favorite stunt?
In the Last Crusade, I like, and again, it goes from him jumping from one thing to another. I like the chase and the fight scene, um, where they're on the horses and they're chasing the tank and like the whole entire
Mm-hmm.
like brigade of Nazis, and then obviously he's fighting the tank, trying not to get crushed by the tank, jumps from the horse onto the tank and takes out, all those, the basically the whole tank unit. And all the while his dad is just, Sean Connery's just sitting there and is like, took you long enough, Indy.
And doesn't he like accidentally fumble someone's gun on the inside and then it shoots all around the inside tank,
Yeah, he
accidentally
does, like,
killing all the
he
Nazis?
like grabs something and it's like complete, not Sean Connery as James Bond. It's just completely Sean Connery as like a dorky, historian, and it's like, oh, what does this button do? Oh, where did everybody go? Oh, they all fell down. Oh, cool. Yep. And then it's like, what took you long enough? What were you doing out there? Why are you sweating?
Shut up straight.
Yeah,
The My favorite moment between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford in Last Crusade, which is my favorite of the Indiana Jones films,
I think it's the best one. Yeah.
is when they're in the plane and he's like, "You need to fire back at them." And Sean Connery does the accidentally like shoots up the tail of the plane. And he's like,
Yep.
"Sean, what, Dad?
They they got us.
They got us."
Yep. Yep. That's an epic one for sure. He's like, oh yeah, because again, he's being, very, you know, trying to think of the word. I'm having a bit of a brain fart. He's being very accident prone, basically.
Yeah, he's Mr.
Like he can't.
Magooing his way through the
Yep, he
film,
can't
kind
do
of,
his anything right. Yeah.
which is just so amazing because again, he's Sean Connery.
Yep. He had to have like that's one of those roles. Like he had to have fun playing that role. I think similar to like in Tropic Thunder, Tom Cruise's role in that movie. Like it's completely not Tom Cruise, and so it's
I
like
rewatched the clip recently.
for once you get to be a completely different person on screen. And same with, and, obviously in Last Crusade, Sean Connery's, much older than we see him in the Bond films. And so I'm sure he's a little bit more okay with kind of making fun of himself a little bit. And he's like, yeah, I got this. Like, this funny old guy, I can do that for sure.
I'm gonna pitch you here. I this is my pitch for
Hmm.
a not it could be Indiana Jones. Like they're not going to reboot it until Harrison Ford is well and dead. But
Right.
Disney owns it the moment he's in the grave. They're remaking
Yep.
but I either this could work for Indiana Jones or I'd love to see it with Zorro. Really, with no good explanation other than it's like Highlander rules, where you
Okay.
have Sean Connery playing a Spaniard. We could have Daniel Craig playing a Spaniard
Okay. I could see
who is
that.
like the older like swashbuckler who mentors the young
Yeah.
Zorro, and he'd be. I'm coming up with a great plot here. He is like because Zorro's thing is in Spain, he was trained as a soldier. Daniel Craig was like his commanding officer, whatever, that trained him, and
Yeah.
he's like the Sam Elliott in Roadhouse, the best
Oh,
of the
yeah.
best, and
Yeah.
whoever the young Zorro is the Patrick Swayze. And when he
Hmm.
returns home, he starts cleaning things up as the Mask of Zorro. And who do they bring in to stop Zorro? Because again, the government needs to do something. They bring
Right.
Daniel Craig, who is his mentor, who
Yeah.
recognizes the fight style.
Yep. And then he's kind of torn between stopping him or, allowing him to kind of keep going. But at the same time, otherwise he's probably going to get, put to the like firing squad. So he's got to at least make it look good. That would be interesting for sure.
Now, can we? Daniel Craig today loves doing accents. Logan Lucky, um, Glass Onion,
Yep.
him doing a Spanish accent for this movie.
I've not heard it, but I'm sure he would at least be willing to attempt it because he's definitely not trying to hide those accents now. He's trying to knock those out of the park.
I want this movie so bad. Hollywood, call me. Blake and I are
Yep.
willing to be producers. We are happy to help you make this movie happen. Just pay us
Yep,
exorbitantly well. You can have whatever you want.
definitely. And Terrence can do the writing too. He's already got half the plot down.
Thank you. Thank you. Story by credit is all I ask.
Yep.
Blake, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Zorro. Where can people go to learn more about you, your work, and the 007 fight breakdowns?
So I've only got an Instagram. My Instagram would be Bond Life Chicago, just all one word, no underscores. That's where I post all my stuff. It's mostly Bond related. Like you said, I am doing what I call 00 fight breakdowns right now, which is mostly going through fight breakdowns of the Bond series. Once that comes to an end, which there's only so many fights in the Bond series for right now. So once that comes to an end, I am thinking I would lean towards, maybe jumping into the Born Identity, Born
Mm-hmm.
Supremacy type series, maybe some Mission Impossible stuff. Um, and maybe we'll even find a Zorro Rides Again breakdown somewhere in there, just to kind of keep it going, keep it interesting. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. But thank you again for having me on. As always, it's a pleasure, and it's a good excuse to kind of watch some old movies now and again too.
Hey, it's awesome. Thank you again for joining us, Blake.
Yeah, thank you.